Good evening. I'm Nima and this is Forum Daily for Monday, November 28th. And we begin tonight with details on Canada's long-awaited Indo-Pacific strategy, which was announced on Sunday, with military spending and closer ties with countries such as India. The Liberal government strategy earmarks $2.3 billion for Canada to form closer ties with countries that span from Pakistan to Japan. Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly says the strategy sends a clear message to the region that Canada is here to stay. Meanwhile, the leaders of James Smith Cree Nation in Saskatchewan met with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today. Mr. Trudeau is visiting the First Nation after it was rocked by a deadly stabbing rampage nearly 3 months ago. 11 people were killed and 18 others were injured in the community, as well as the nearby village of Weldon. James Smith Cree Nation Chief Wally Burns has been calling for a shift to Indigenous-led policing and has also said the community needs funding for housing. The Emergencies Act inquiry moved into its next phase today, beginning to hear testimony from experts. The Commission will explore the public policy implications of the government's decision to use emergency powers to clear the blockades in downtown Ottawa and at border crossings. About 50 experts are slated to share their perspective this week on topics from protest rights to cryptocurrency. All right, turning to Quebec now, where a former employee of the province's power utility charged with spying on behalf of China has been freed on bail with conditions while he awaits his trial. 35-year-old Yu Sheng Wang is the first person in Canadian history to be charged with economic espionage under Canada's Security of Information Act. Federal prosecutors had opposed his release because they feared he would flee the country. But Mr. Wang has denied the charges and says he wants to remain in Canada to clear his name. All right, well, in Toronto, police say they've arrested a 61-year-old man in these DNA-linked cold case murders of Aaron Gilmore and Susan Tice. The two women were found dead in their homes, sexually assaulted and stabbed to death within months of each other in 1983. Police Chief James Raymer announced the arrest of Joseph George Sutherland of Moosonee, Ontario. In the prairies, hundreds of people gathered at events across the region over the weekend. This was to remember victims of the Holodomor, which was a man-made famine that killed millions of Ukrainians in 1932 to 1933. The president of Manitoba Provincial Council of the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress says this year's event had special meaning for those who have recently fled Ukraine because of the war with Russia. She says the war feels like the Holodomor all over again. Scholars estimate millions of Ukrainians died from starvation during the collectivization of agriculture under Soviet rule. Moving to a new report which says Atlantic Canada was home to the highest and lowest welfare rates among the provinces last year. The report from Toronto-based anti-poverty think tank Maytree says New Brunswick had the lowest rate, this with a single person receiving $7,499, including tax breaks in 2021. PEI had the highest rate at $13,838 for the year, including tax breaks. Maytree says poverty deepened across the country in 2021 as inflation increased and pandemic benefits ended. An Ontario Food Bank collective is calling on the province to invest in housing and improve social assistance as it reports a surge in visits. Feed Ontario says in a report released today that more than 500,000 adults and kids visited an Ontario food bank. This is for a total of 4.3 million times between April 2021 and this past March. Now that's a 42% jump in visits compared to visits in 2019. Feed Ontario attributed the spike to long-standing issues, which include precarious employment, inadequate disability supports, and the rising cost of living. Mounties in Alberta say a search of a Canada Post employee's home and vehicle turned up in excess of over 500 deliverable items. Police say the employee has been arrested and released with undertaking and conditions, and they will appear in Wainwright Provincial Court on January 5th. Police say the parcels have been returned to Canada Post for delivery to their intended destinations, and they're advising people to help prevent mail theft by picking up mail every day and as soon as possible after it has been delivered. Farmers, rodeo competitors, and livestock from across Canada and the United States are traveling to Regina for the Canadian Western Agribition. The gates to Agribition opened today, with the first events kicking off at 8 a.m. Over 100,000 people are expected to attend the exhibition throughout the week. Forum Daily will be back after a commercial break with a deeper look at Canada's new Indo-Pacific strategy. Indo-Pacific expert Jonathan Berkshire Miller will join us to discuss the government's new plan, so stay with us. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly says the country's new Indo-Pacific strategy sends a strong message to the region that Canada can be trusted as a long-term partner. The strategy earmarks $2.3 billion for Canada to form closer ties with countries that span Pakistan to Japan, including by increasing military presence in the region. It includes nearly $500 million to deploy a third naval frigate to the area and boost collaboration on both cybersecurity and military training. Well, with us now to discuss the strategy is Jonathan Berkshire Miller, an expert on Indo-Pacific affairs and senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks so much for having me, Nima.
So what do we know so far about the overall goal of this new Indo-Pacific strategy and why Canada is investing $2.3 billion into it?
Well, I think it's the sort of coming to fruition of a long-standing sort of feeling in Canada that we need to realize that we are a Pacific nation. Of course, we're a North American nation too, and an Atlantic nation and an Arctic nation, but we do have significant ties to the Asia Pacific. And what happens there, for the good and for the bad, means a lot to Canada. So I think that the strategy process is a recognition of that, recognizing what our interests in this part of the world are, and making sure that we secure them.
And we did mention a few in our intro, but what are the overall measures proposed in this strategy?
Well, I think the strategy is looking at a number of different pillars on security, on trade, on climate, energy, et cetera, and trying to realize that the different challenges that this region faces and the different opportunities are wide in scope and wide in partnerships. I think, as you mentioned, I mean, the scoping of this region goes from the East China Sea in Japan and South Korea all the way to the Indian Ocean and India and Pakistan. So there's a wide range of states that we have to deal with in this region and a wide range of issues.
Wide range of issues, indeed. So on that note, how critical is this Indo-Pacific strategy and trade for Canada in the region, especially amid tensions with China in particular?
Well, I think again, this is a recognition that, and maybe COVID sort of the COVID pandemic spread this up a little bit quicker, is that we need to diversify our trading efforts to more secure and reliable partners. So when we think about the Asia Pacific, China is one country, but there's more countries in that region, and many others are much more reliable suppliers, such as Japan, such as South Korea, such as India, for example. So I think we need to bolster those relationships. So I think that's part of what the genesis of this strategy looks at.
And we know the strategy is aiming to invest in people-to-people ties and building a sustainable future in the region. So what exactly does this look like practically?
Well, I think it's going to take a whole team of Canada effort. So it's not just more ships, naval ships into the region or more diplomats into the region, but this is going to take a significant private sector effort. This is going to involve civil society and a recognition that our future really is an Asia Pacific future. And in order to seize those opportunities, we need to do this in a tandem with government at all levels, but with also with other stakeholders.
And it's clear that we're not the only country interested in the Indo-Pacific region. So overall, how does this plan measure up to our allies and what they're doing in the area?
You're right. I think we were pretty slow on the delivery of this. I mean, it was over 3 years in the making, and several of our other allies have already had strategies: the United States, Japan, Australia, many states in Europe. I think that there's some similarities, as there should be similarities. I was happy to see, for example, mentioning of working with the United States in the region, working with the quote unquote Five Eyes, which is our Anglo countries that we work together on security intelligence. That makes sense. I mean, we need to be working with countries that are like-minded and share our interests in order to secure the future that we want in this part of the world.
Is there anything missing in this strategy when it comes to Canada strengthening its presence in the region?
Well, as always, the devil's in the details. And I think that there are some things that we want to see action on. Words are one thing, action is another thing. So I think that there's plenty of pledges here and commitments rhetorically, but we need to actually see that turn into concrete actions. One area that I think that it was positive to see some development was on foreign interference, for example, but we didn't see the government go as far as to pledge to move forward on discussing legislation, for example, of a foreign agent registry, which I think is an important thing that Canada needs. So definitely are some blind spots that I think still need to be addressed.
Sounds like a lot to keep our eyes on. Sir, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, stay tuned. We'll be right back after the break with more major news stories from across Canada. Doctors urge Canadians to keep up with routine vaccinations. And Alberta Children's Hospital is getting a heated trailer amid a surge in patients. Food banks call for donations, even as they say structural changes are needed. E3 Lithium gets federal funding, and a heritage group in Nova Scotia works to save a lighthouse that is over 100 years old. We'll be back with more on those stories, along with others like them after the break, so stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back. Pediatricians are urging patients to make sure their kids get their routine vaccinations against measles, whooping cough, and polio to avoid outbreaks. They are worried that the preventable diseases could spread quickly due to a drop in routine vaccinations because of school closures during the pandemic. Dr. Sam Wong of the Canadian Pediatric Society is blaming disinformation and vaccine hesitancy, as well as what he calls the failure of the public health system to provide routine vaccines. Between April 2019 and April 2020, there was a 39% drop in the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine in Quebec. On the West Coast, British Columbia's health minister spoke on a series of new measures to help bring more internationally trained doctors to the province. He says the efforts represent significant changes that will make a difference in the lives of people receiving primary care. Adrian Dix joined Premier David Eby on Sunday. This was when he announced plans that they say will triple the number of internationally trained family doctors who can become licensed in BC each year. Mr. Eby says the province is expanding the number of seats available in the Practice Ready Assessment Program to 96 by March 2024. All right, well, meanwhile, Alberta Health Services says a heated trailer at Alberta's Children's Hospital in Calgary will help it handle a surge in patients. The agency says the trailer will be operational early next month. It calls the additional space a comfort measure to help with crowding and weather conditions, but it notes that it won't be used as a primary treatment area. Health officials said earlier this month that inpatient units at both Alberta Children's and Stollery Children's Hospital in Edmonton were at or over 100% of their normal capacity. Moving to the east now, where the Muslim community in Moncton is calling for change. This comes after one of its members died Wednesday while waiting for care in a New Brunswick emergency room. Abdal Khan is the president of the Moncton Muslim Association, and he says the New Brunswick government must do something about its struggling healthcare system. He says the man died early on Wednesday at the Moncton Hospital after waiting in the emergency room for over 5 hours. The association held a rally on Saturday at the hospital to demand that the province address the overcrowding issue in its healthcare system. Back in BC, a coroner's jury is set to begin hearing evidence into the death of an Indigenous teenager at a group home in the Fraser Valley. 17-year-old Trayvon Desjardins' body was found in a closet at his group home in Abbotsford in September 2020. Now, this was 4 days after he was reported missing. Police say there was no criminality involved, although the cause of death was not released. Canadian food insecurity researchers are highlighting food drives as a tough sell, despite the good that they usually bring. Josh Smee is the executive director of the Newfoundland and Labrador-based nonprofit Food First, and he says he tends to feel conflicted during the holidays when calls ramp up to donate to local food banks. He says the system is built to allow private charities to fill in where the social safety nets should be. Mr. Smee says donating to food banks won't put more money in the pockets of people who rely on them for meals, but systemic change, such as increasing minimum wages and income support levels, will. The federal government is investing $27 million in an Alberta-based company that has developed the technology to extract lithium from oil field brines. The money is being provided to E3 Lithium through Ottawa's critical mineral strategy. E3 has already drilled test wells within Alberta's historic Leduc oil field region, and it plans to have a field project up and running next year to extract battery-grade lithium, which is critical to building electric vehicles. Imperial Oil has also invested in E3 Lithium and is providing technical and development support for the company. An aid group that receives funding from Canada is delivering medical supplies to liberated Ukrainian cities. As the war with Russia rages on, French pediatrician Dr. Christian Kerrer is helping to spearhead the Association Internationale de Coopération Médicale. Mr. Kerrer was part of a small convoy last Friday that transported 20 tons of medical supplies to cities in the region of Izium. A community group in Nova Scotia is hoping to save a 137-year-old lighthouse. The Schaffner Point Lighthouse, informally known as the Port Royal Lighthouse, has been wrapped in a protective cover since 2019. Now, this was after repairs revealed that it had a host of issues within the structure. But last month, the Annapolis Heritage Society put the Port Royal Lighthouse Association in charge of the 13-meter structure. The association is planning to apply for grants and host fundraising events to raise the money to fix up the lighthouse, which was built in 1885. All right, Forum Daily will be right back after the break with a look at news from around the world, of course, so stay with us. We'll be right back shortly. China's Xi Jinping is facing a wave of public anger over his zero-COVID policy. This comes barely a month after granting himself a third five-year term as the country's leader. Demonstrators poured onto the streets over the weekend in cities including Shanghai and Beijing. Most protesters focused their anger on restrictions that confine families to their homes for months and have been criticized as neither scientific nor effective. But some also shouted for Mr. Xi and the Communist Party, which has ruled China for 73 years, to give up power. All right, moving to public anger and demonstrations in Iran. This is where the niece of the country's supreme leader is calling for people to pressure their governments to cut ties with Tehran. Farideh Moradkhani issued the call in a video statement circulated after her November 23rd arrest, which was reported by the U.S.-based rights monitor Rana. Ms. Moradkhani is a longtime activist and the closest member of the Supreme Leader's family to be arrested. The protests were sparked by the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini in police custody, and they have morphed into the most serious challenge to Iran's establishment since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Amid Europe's ongoing energy crisis, Russian energy giant Gazprom announced on Monday that it will not further reduce natural gas to Moldova. This comes after it had threatened to do so after claiming that bills went unpaid and that flows crossing through Ukraine were not making it to Moldova. Gazprom tweeted on Monday that Moldova Gas has eliminated the violation of payment for November supplies and that funds for the gas deposited on the territory of Ukraine intended for consumers in Moldova have been received. All right, turning to the U.S. for an update on a case involving a white gunman who massacred 10 black shoppers and workers at a supermarket in Buffalo in May. Peyton Gendron has pleaded guilty to murder and hate-motivated terrorism charges. The guilty plea guarantees that Mr. Gendron will spend the rest of his life in prison. He used a semi-automatic rifle and wore body armor to carry out a racist assault that he hoped would help preserve white power in the U.S. And just days after the rampage in Buffalo, a gunman killed 19 children and 2 teachers at a school in Uvalde, Texas. All right, moving to Indonesia now, where authorities have begun vaccinating children for the polio virus in the province of Aceh. This comes after 4 were infected with the highly contagious disease. Monday's mass immunization campaign aims to vaccinate some 1.2 million children. Well, as the fallout from the collapse of FTX continues, cryptocurrency lender BlockFi is filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. BlockFi said Monday that it was filing for bankruptcy protection to stabilize its business and give it the chance to perform a restructuring. The company says its restructuring will include recovering all obligations that it is owed by its counterparties. This includes FTX and associated corporate entities. Electricity shortages have been plaguing Zimbabwe and are set to worsen. This comes after an authority that manages the country's biggest dam said water levels are now too low to continue power generation activities. The Kariba South Hydropower Station provides Zimbabwe with about 70% of its electricity. It has been producing significantly less than its capacity in recent years amid drought. A United Nations-backed mission is recommending that the Great Barrier Reef be added to the list of endangered World Heritage Sites. A new report is sounding the alarm that without ambitious, rapid, and sustained climate action, the world's largest coral reef is in peril. The warning came in a report published Monday. In more climate-related news, the world's largest active volcano has started to erupt for the first time in nearly 4 decades. Hawaii's Mauna Loa began erupting late last night, bringing volcanic ash and debris down on nearby communities on the Big Island. The U.S. Geological Survey says lava flows have been contained and are not threatening nearby communities so far. Authorities say they cannot predict how long the volcano will erupt and whether it could cause lava to flow to populated areas of the island. Well, it looks like gaslighting is Merriam-Webster's word of the year. It means the psychological manipulation of a person, usually over an extended period of time. The word was brought to life more than 80 years ago with Gaslight, a 1938 play by Patrick Hamilton that led to 2 film adaptations in the 1940s. Lookups for the word on Merriam-Webster.com increased 1,740% in 2022 over the year before. But the dictionary says there wasn't a single event that drove significant spikes in the curiosity, as it usually goes with the chosen word of the year. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily.